Chapter 13. There were times, Samacro mused, where something in his life felt vaguely like a bit of personal history repeating itself. There were also times there was no vagueness about it whatsoever. Today was one of the latter. Flying the Springhawk into the Patatas Hive home system of Netei, flying along the same approach vector they'd used during the punitive raid with Admiral Aralani, flying in with no idea of what was waiting for them. Only this time they didn't have the Vigilant and the other ships of Aralani's task force along. This time they were going in alone. "Prepare for breakout," Thrawn called calmly from his command chair. Samacro glanced around the bridge, long experience enabling him to gauge the officers' moods merely by looking at them. They were tense, he could tell, for all the same reasons he was. But he could see no panic or serious doubt. They'd been with Thrawn long enough to trust him to get them through whatever mess he was leading them into. Distantly, Samacro wondered if they'd had that same confidence back when he'd been the Springhawk's commander. 3, 2, 1. The star flares flashed and settled into stars framing the planet Netei. "Dalvu?" Thrawn asked. "Combat range, we've got fighters," the sensor officer announced. "Approximately 20 gunboats within combat and mid-range." "Check planetary orbit," Thrawn said. "I think I see some larger ships there." "Checking confirmed, sir," Dalvu said. "I make 7 ships, 6 enhanced cruisers, 1 heavy frigate." Samacro eyed the display. The 7 ships were flying in a Patatas Guard configuration, the frigate in the center with a cruiser on either flank and 2 cruisers each in a line in front and astern of it. "Full magnification and status readouts," Thrawn ordered. "Frigate first, then the cruisers." The image of a medium-sized ship appeared on the sensor display, blurred somewhat by distance and the tenuous planetary atmosphere it was currently orbiting through. But it was clear enough to see the standard Patatas heavy warship design. Wide and flat, heavy armor with minimal point defenses on top, main lasers arrayed along the leading edge, missile tubes positioned underneath the bow. It was an unusual design among the various aliens the Ascendancy dealt with, but it fit well with the Patatas tactic of approaching an opponent with lasers blazing, then pitching up to fire missiles as the attacking ship veered up and away to open a path for the next attacker moving in behind it. "Mid-captain?" Thrawn invited. "Looks Patatas to me, sir," Samacro said. "Certainly doesn't match any of the Vagari ship configurations in our records." "Agreed," Thrawn said. "Which doesn't conclusively prove anything, of course, given the Vagari habit of conquering other aliens and adapting their technology. But it's a strong indicator, particularly since I don't see any major ship modifications." Samacro shifted his attention to the planetary data now streaming across the secondary sensor display. "I also see no evidence of large-scale damage on the planet's surface," he pointed out. "Excellent observation," Thrawn said approvingly. The rumors spoke of an alliance, but they could as easily have been a distorted report of a Vagari invasion. But the Patatas would hardly have given up without a fight, which would likely have led to visible planetary destruction. Samacro nodded. Their joint conclusion didn't address the original rumors, he knew. But Thrawn liked to trim the weeds from the edges of an operation, clearing out the unlikely options before focusing on the main thrust. In this case, they were going to find the Patatas either alone or in full alliance with the pirates. Either scenario could be trouble, but both left the Springhawk free to respond as soon as they were fired on without fear of tearing into victims, or unlikely with the Patatas innocent bystanders. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Brish called from the comm station. He touched a key. "This is the Prince Militaire," a Patatas voice came over the bridge speaker. Samacro frowned. Prince Militaire? He'd never heard of that rank before. If it even was a rank, it could just as easily be a title or name or something unique to these aliens. Chiss diplomats had dealt with Patatas negotiators a few times, but the inner workings of their government remained a complete mystery. Certainly the expansionary defense fleet had had no interaction with them that didn't involve shooting or being shot at. "You are trespassing within Holy Patatas space," the prince continued. "Unusually talky today, aren't they?" Afbria commented from the weapons station. "Sir, all enemy ships are holding station." "Talky and standing their ground," Samacro said. "Not like them at all." No, Thrawn said. It's not. Samakro looked sideways at him. Thrawn's eyes were narrowed, his attention shifting back and forth between the sensor and tactical displays. You said we were going to ask them about the Vagari? Samakro reminded his commander quietly. Yes, Thrawn said thoughtfully. He hesitated another moment, then touched the comm key on his chair. Prince Militaire, this is Senior Captain Thrawn aboard the Chiss Expansionary Defense Fleet warship Springhawk, he called. We come in peace with a question for you. He keyed the mute. Samakro frowned. You're not going to ask the question, sir, he asked. Not yet, Thrawn said. Call this an experiment. Patadas ships on the move, sir, Dalvu said. 10 fighters moving toward us, orbiting ships reconfiguring, remaining fighters holding station. Watch closely, Mid-Captain, Thrawn said. Let's see what they do. Yes, sir, Samakro said, suppressing a snort. Actually, if the Patadas followed their standard battle doctrine, what they would do was swarm their target and try to blow it out of the sky, and with the Springhawk out here all alone. There, Thrawn said, pointing at one of the displays. The orbiting ships. You see it? Samakro focused on them. The 7 ships were on the move, shifting from sentry to defense configuration. One of the lead cruisers moved up to a position above the frigate, while one of the trailing cruisers moved beneath it. Defense configuration, he said, which suggests our Prince Militaire is aboard the frigate. Correct, Thrawn said. But did you notice how the cruisers took up their new positions? Samakro frowned. One of the leading ships moved up. One of the trailing ships moved down. The first leading cruiser went up to dorsal guard position, while the one behind it stayed in vanguard position, Thrawn said. But the trailing cruisers did things in the opposite way, with the one directly behind the frigate dropping beneath it in ventral guard position, while the one farthest aft moved forward to take its place. Samakro played the memory back. Thrawn was right. Yes, sir, he said. I'm not sure I see the significance. Fighters gathering, sir, Afbria called. I see them. Thrawn keyed off the mute. Prince Militaire, this is Senior Captain Thrawn. As I've said already, we come in peace. However, if your current situation remains unchanged, I assure you that you'll witness the full might of the Chiss Ascendancy. Do you make threats against the Patadas Hiveborn, Senior Captain Thrawn? The prince demanded. I stand by the precise words of my statement, Prince Militaire, Thrawn said. Do you intend harm to the Patadas? I stand by the precise words of my statement. The consequences are yours. I am prepared to accept them. Then all is in your hands. I am prepared. A tone sounded from the speaker. He's cut off transmission, sir, Brish reported. Understood, Thrawn said. Stand ready, all weapons. Samakro took a careful breath. What was Thrawn doing? Sir, we have no authorization to initiate hostilities against the Patadas. Nor do I intend to, Thrawn assured him. Do you see anything odd about those fighters' attack formation? Samakro shifted his attention to the tactical, trying to force back the sudden doubts, his own earlier thoughts whispering back to him. To trust him to get them through whatever mess he was leading them into. He frowned. Patadas fighters typically used a swarm strategy, driving in at full speed from all directions in a horizontally layered attack. But these ships had instead gathered in groups of 2 and 3 and were moving warily toward the Springhawk. That's not the usual Patadas structure, he said. Indeed it's not, Thrawn said, a hint of grim amusement in his voice. But it is one we've seen before. An instant later, the 2 nearest groups of fighters opened fire, their lasers blazing at the Springhawk. Incoming fire, Afbria snapped. Response, sir. Hold your fire, Thrawn said calmly. Sir, we're being attacked. No, we're not, Thrawn said. Dalvu, damage report? Damage, Dalvu broke off. None, sir, she said, clearly confused. Enemy lasers running at 1/10 power? That can't be, Samakro insisted, looking at the sensor readout. Those lasers had been fully as bright as anything he'd ever seen from a Patadas attack. But Dalvu was right. The energy blasts had barely even gotten the attention of the Springhawk's electrostatic shields, let alone strained them. I don't understand. Dalvu, analysis on laser spectrum, Thrawn ordered. What are they keyed to? Samakro felt his eyes narrow. A ridiculous question. Spectrum lasers by definition were designed to quickly shift their energy frequencies to whatever would be best absorbed by the material they were focused on. They're not keyed to our hull, sir, Dalvu said, still sounding confused. They're Again she stopped, but this time she half-turned in her seat to give Thrawn a wry smile. "They're keyed to the interplanetary dust profile." For a couple of heartbeats, Samacro still didn't get it. Keyed to the dust profile? Then suddenly he understood. Lasers were only visible because the passing energy ionized the tenuous dust and solar wind medium drifting through the otherwise empty space. By keying to the ionization profile of that mix, the fighters' low-energy lasers were making themselves maximally visible. As visible, in fact, as full-power lasers that were instead keyed to a warship's hull. "You're right, sir," he said, his words and conclusion sounding incredulous in his ears. "It's not an attack." He looked at Thrawn. "It's a light show." "It is indeed," Thrawn said. "Afpria, adjust 3 of our spectrum lasers to that same frequency and power level and begin returning fire. Make your shots misses or glancing blows so that the onlookers don't wonder about the lack of damage." "Onlookers, sir?" Afpria asked, throwing a quick frown back at Thrawn. "You mean the Patatas?" "Hardly," Thrawn said. "The Patatas are our partners in Mid-Captain Samacro's appropriately named light show." He looked at Samacro. "We've discussed the possible combinations of Patatas and Vagari," he said. "Historically, the Vagari borrow their victims' technology, but seldom take their ships without visible modification." He gestured toward the orbiting cruisers and frigate, still traveling in their close-knit defensive cluster. "But we do know someone who is happy to commandeer ships directly, either taking over their crews or replacing them with their own." Samacro looked at the cluster, then back at the fighters pretending to attack and to be attacked in turn. Someone who directly commandeered ships? He stiffened as the fighters' attack patterns suddenly registered. And someone to whom Thrawn's very name was an instant incitement to violence. "The Nicardan?" "I believe so," Thrawn said. "I've long suspected General Yves was trying to make a connection with the Patatas, either as allies or subjects. If my reading of the current situation is correct, it's the latter." He smiled tightly. "I further believe the Patatas have realized that our arrival offers a chance to get rid of them." Samacro thought it over. Fighters who used non-Patatas tactics and formations and then only pretended to attack. An official who initiated a conversation, made a big loud show of antagonism, but then asked specifically if the Springhawk intended a threat against the Patatas. Thrawn, assuring the prince that he came in peace, but also threatening to show the full might of the Chiss Ascendancy. No, not threatening, promising. "And you think the Nicardan are listening?" he asked. "The Prince Militaire's supposedly hostile words to us strongly suggest that." Thrawn cocked an eyebrow. "So tell me, where are they?" Samacro looked at the tactical. How in the world could he answer that? The Nicardan could be anywhere on the ground, anywhere in space, anywhere even in the whole of Patatas territory. He didn't much like these guessing games of Thrawn's even when things were calm. Here, at the front end of a battle, he liked them even less. "Remember the cruisers," Thrawn murmured. Samacro frowned at the formation on the tactical, thinking back to their switch to defensive posture. "They're in the ventral cruiser," he said, "the one riding beneath the frigate." "How do you know?" "Because that's the one that started out directly behind the frigate, which I assume is the ship the Prince Militaire is aboard." "Unproven, but likely," Thrawn agreed. "I suspect we interrupted an exercise in Nicardan tactics, with that particular cruiser threatening the frigate should there be any resistance. When we appeared, the cruiser quickly moved to a spot where it could maintain that threat while also being the best protected ship in the group. Anything else?" "Only the fact that you just pointed out, sir," Samacro said. "The cluster is in mid-orbit, with nothing likely to come at them from that direction. Why would the prince need a ship to protect against an attack from his own world?" "Why indeed?" Thrawn said. "Very good, Mid-Captain. Asmorty, I believe it's time to make our move. Start us inward toward the frigate." "Yes, sir," Asmorty said. The planet and starscape shifted as the Springhawk turned a few degrees and began accelerating. "Sir, there are 2 groups of fighters between us and the cluster." "They'll move aside," Thrawn said calmly. "Afpria, shift low-power lasers to the nearest of the 2 blocking groups and open fire. Maintain near misses and glancing blows. No damage." "You think the Nicardan can see us?" Samacro asked. "Their view is being blocked by 2 other ships. If they had no way of seeing us, The Patatas would have no need for an elaborately counterfeit attack, Thrawn pointed out. They may be tapping into the sensors from the other ships, but we must assume they're monitoring our activities. And in the meantime, there were a cruiser and a frigate, not to mention several fighters, between the Springhawk and its target. How are we going to get the Patatas ships to move? Unfortunately, we can't, Thrawn said. I have a plan, but a successful resolution will rest on the Prince Militaire's shoulders. We can only trust that he's as quick and perceptive as I believe him to be. First fighter group moving aside, Dalvu called. Second fighter group pulling back toward the warship cluster. Excellent, Thrawn said. As anticipated, Afpria set up 2 breacher missiles with 4 plasma spheres to follow. They'll be launched in a straight line, no spread, aimed and timed for impact on the frigate. Yes, sir, Afpria said, his fingers skating across his board. Time until attack, whenever the launchers are ready. Yes, sir. Afpria hesitated. May I remind the captain that if we launch too soon, Are you prepared to witness the might of the Chiss Ascendancy? Your actions are likewise noted, Prince Militaire said. We are prepared. Do your worst. The comm keyed off. A challenge? Samacro suggested. A request, Thrawn corrected him grimly. Afpria, launch breachers. On the tactical, the breacher missiles appeared, arrowing from their tubes. A moment later, they became visible out the viewport as they burned through space toward the planet below. Samacro checked the data list, confirmed that Afpriu had correctly taken the warship cluster's own orbital velocity into account with the attack trajectory. The group of Patatas fighters fell back before the missiles, heading toward the cluster but holding station between the missiles and the warships. The countdown mark on the plasma spheres edged toward 0. Launch spheres, Thrawn ordered. There was a subtle jolt as the 4 plasma spheres shot away from the Springhawk and chased after the missiles. The Patatas fighters were still falling back, Samacro saw, but they weren't nearly as fast as the missiles and were rapidly losing ground. For a bad moment, he thought the prince had misunderstood what Thrawn was doing and would let the fighters take the impacts. Fighter maneuvering thrusters activated, Dalvu called. Veering aside, fighters clear. Missiles clear to target. Should you warn him? Samacro asked. The Nickerden may hear, Thrawn said. His voice was steady, but Samacro could hear his commander's tension. If the prince wasn't as smart and alert as Thrawn was banking on, the Springhawk was about to abandon this shadowboxing and open real hostilities. Afpria, cease laser fire. The sky went back to starlit darkness as the Springhawk and then the Patatas fighters ceased their sham battle. The breachers were nearly to the warships, the plasma spheres right on their tails. Samacro held his breath, feeling an odd sense that everyone else, Chiss and Patatas alike, was doing likewise. And on the sensor display, the top cruiser of the stack veered violently to starboard, moving clear of the incoming missiles. The frigate beneath it, its larger size and mass making that particular maneuver impossible, instead executed a portside roll, pitching up on its left side and getting clear of the missile's path. Samacro got a glimpse of the cruiser beneath it, flying on its back with its missile tubes pointed in clear threat at the prince's ship as the breachers blazed past the frigate and slammed into it. The missiles were still splashing the cruiser with acid, burning away electrostatic barrier nodes and missile control circuits when the plasma spheres impacted. The concentrated bursts of ions added their destruction to that of the breachers, wrecking control systems and turning the cruiser into a paralyzed mass of metal and ceramic. And as the last running light on the cruiser winked out, the frigate and the rest of the cruisers opened fire. Not with low-power weapons, as the fighters had against the Springhawk. The whole area blazed with light as seemingly every laser on the Patatas ships targeted the disabled cruiser, blasting away huge chunks of hull and inner structure, shattering section after section after section. Superheated liquids and gases spewed outward. Secondary explosions of missiles and laser capacitors racked the remaining structure. And then, with one final barrage, it was over. For a long moment, the Springhawk's bridge was silent. Samacro stared at the drifting debris that had once been a warship, feeling a little sick despite himself. He'd seen death and destruction, but seldom seen such cold and absolute fury. Across the bridge, Brish cleared his throat. Senior Captain, the Prince Militaire is signaling. Thank you. Thrawn touched the switch. This is Senior Captain Thrawn, he said. I trust all is in hand. All is in hand, Senior Captain, the Prince Militaire said. His voice, Samacro noted, was completely calm, in eerie contrast with the ferocity of the attack. Our would-be Nicardan enslavers are dead. They were all in the enhanced cruiser. All those that mattered, the leaders, and those who directly threatened my life and trade for the cooperation of all the Hive-born. Those who remain on the Hive home will be dealt with. The prince paused. Are dealt with, he corrected, still calm. There are tales that the Chiss Ascendancy has dealt with all other Nicardan. There may yet be small pockets of resistance, Thrawn said, but they will not last much longer, nor are they likely to extend their reach to Patata space. They certainly will not, the prince said, and Samacro could hear both promise and threat in his voice. In past days the Hiveborn have faced you to their regret, Senior Captain Thrawn. It was a unique experience to have you as an ally. The Ascendancy was glad it could be of service, Thrawn said. The Nicardan have been a blot upon the chaos for too long. Then we are finished here? By no means. Senior Captain Thrawn, the prince said. By no means. Samacro looked at the tactical, a tingle on the back of his neck. Those Patatas fighters were still out there, many of them still in combat range. A quick retuning of their lasers to full power. You said you had a question, the prince continued. If the Patatas can answer it, we will be honored to do so.